Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, the Atlanta Braves are a team we followed really all year long, and now a really, really good chance here to make a move. Had 4 games against the Phillies this past weekend, essentially, and then went 2-2 there. It's kind of been par for the course for their season and for their month. They're now 5-5 since the All-Star break. Their latest win coming today, the first game of a doubleheader, got a win 2-0 in the first of their 4 games over the New York Mets. And this is an interesting situation here as we go into this part of the year where it's either kind of put up or shut up time, and kind of who maybe takes the reins of this division. I think it starts in the series.
I think the Mets overall probably feel that they have something to prove to Atlanta, because Atlanta's had their number going back to, the early 90s. The last time I really remember the Mets beating the Braves consistently was when the Braves had like Ken Oberkfell and Ken Griffey Sr. and Rafael Ramirez and those guys in the mid-'80s. But going into this game, I think this was going to determine whether or not the Braves stayed in contention, whether or not they made a move at the deadline. Right. If the Mets, took 4 or 5 of them, the Braves probably wouldn't make a move. If the Braves continue like they did in Game 1, winning 2-0, then I think they might make a move. So you looked at in Game 1 of this series, the Braves won 2-0. This is Game 1 of this series. It was kind of very similar to Game 1 that they had back in June 21st. DeGrom started that one for the Mets. Kyle Muller started that one for the Braves as well, and Muller pitched pretty well that game as well as he did this game. But going back to the Braves game against Braves series against the Phillies, in the games they won, the Braves outscored Philadelphia 22-5. In the games they lost, they got outscored 7-2. That's pretty much been the ammo for the Braves all year. But Muller was a big part of the Braves, and if they're going to be consistent in the second half, they're going to have to rely on their rookies to give them performances like Muller today. But that was kind of indicative of what we've seen from Atlanta the last 3 games against the Mets. Yeah. If you look at that, going into their last series against the Mets in Atlanta, they had a game on Monday where they blew a 3-0 lead in the 7th inning and they lost 4-3. I thought that could be a turning point for the Mets. It's been a turning point for the Braves. Right. The Braves outscored them 20-2 in that next game. 4-3, they beat DeGrom the day after on a walk-off win. And today, 2-0 against the Mets to stay in the race in the East. They're now only 4 games back. Right. And they still got 4 more left to play. In this game, too, the Mets went with all relievers in there, while the Braves are throwing Bryce Wilson, who's another young pitcher. And if we know something about the Mets against the Braves, they struggle hitting the Braves' young pitchers. They struggled with Tucker Davidson earlier this year. Right. They've struggled with Muller twice now. If you look at how Muller's done against the Mets this year, 9 innings. The Mets only have 8 hits against them, 5 hits and 31 at-bats, which is a 129 batting average. They've only scored 1 earned run, and that was in the last game. And a whip, 0.89. That's 8 runners have reached base in 9 innings. Very good for a young pitcher the Braves are going to need in the second half of the year. But we've seen the Braves, when they win big. Yes. When they lose, they usually lose by 1 or 2 runs, which is why their run differential overall is high. They and the Marlins, if you can believe it, the Marlins and the Mets are the 3 teams in the National League East that have a positive run differential. Meanwhile, the Marlins are like 13 games under 500. So run differential isn't always indicative of being successful, but it shows that if you're winning games by that many runs and you're not winning the close games, you're going to struggle. As you can see, Atlanta 16 and 17 and 1-run games, and the extra innings is really what killed them. 2 and 7, and I think a lot of that has to do with that dumb rule where you get a guy on second base to start the inning, and that's kind of hurt Atlanta in a lot of their losses. And that doesn't. Their 2 wins were comeback wins, like huge comeback wins. One against the Phillies that they came back from 4 runs, and one against the Marlins where they were down in the bottom of the 9th. So really, they shouldn't have won those games either. But this shows you how bad the Braves have been in extra innings this year. They could be 0-9 essentially in those games. So they got to do a better job at winning close games. And you've seen the last time they played the Mets, they beat DeGrom 4-3, and then this game 1, they won 2-0. So and then they won the last time they were at the Citi Field earlier in the year. They won Game 2 of a doubleheader, 1-0, and then they won another game 2-1. So they're learning how to beat the Mets in close games. If they can continue doing that overall against the rest of the National League, I think the Braves can still win this division. These other 4 games at Citi Field, this will go a long way to determining, A, if the Braves continue and make a big move at the deadline, and B, how close they get to the Mets.
Exactly. Injuries have kind of been a story of this team as they move forward, but I think in a weird way they can work around that, and they've done so a little bit by trading for Jock Peterson, and now they're in a situation, as you said, that they still possibly could consider themselves as buyers and make another move here. And last thing we'll touch on from an individual standpoint is Freddie Freeman, who is once again just coming off an MVP season. Yep. Sometimes you'll see a little drop off, but he's been sensational.
And again, a Met killer. In game 1, 2 hits. Overall for July, a very, very good July. 419 for the month. Has the most hits in Major League Baseball this month. 6 home runs, 17 runs, and I mean July is almost over. So we're going to be at July 27th tomorrow, and to be at 419 for the month just shows you Freddie Freeman is the heart and soul of this team.
Exactly.
Acuna is the best player, we know that. But Freeman is the guy that makes them go. He's the heart and soul.
Exactly. And I think he knew after the All-Star break he will be needed to score runs for this team in a really big way moving forward. And you want your MVP and your de facto captain. I know they don't have those necessarily, but I think he would be labeled as the team captain to be the guy that kind of helps, he
settles everything down.
Number one, settles everything down, but two, you have to provide some of the offense.
Absolutely.
Baseball, there is no one-man team,
Nope.
but I think out of all the people that can make it to where the one person kind of leads the way, I think he's it.
And the other thing, Jock Peterson, 9 RBIs since his acquisition back on July 16th, including one in Game 1 today. A big part of why the Braves are starting to get a little bit more consistent on offense.
Exactly. We'll see how that rest of that series goes. As Mark pointed out, it's a really, really important one for both teams, both the Atlanta Braves as well as the New York Mets as they battle for first place there in the division. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll talk a little bit of NFL, and we'll talk Alabama athletes that are doing well right now in Tokyo at the Olympic Games. We'll talk about it coming up next.